You may have heard in the Autodesk presentation the other day that they've introduced new tools for adding joints in 3D. That was in May 2014, this is May 2013. So I'm going to show you the traditional method of doing it in 2D. The reason for that is when we go to add stuff, or in this case joints in 3D, they might say, oh, I want to put it next to a hip over here, I want it next to a knee there, I want it next to a foot there we go. That's not what's happened at all. It's very, very hard to place things in 3D, so we're going to be much more precise and do it in 2D. So we're going to you generally always start at the legs. You do legs, arms, the body, then head. So we'll start with legs. So we've got the side view because we've got the best view of that there. Turn my joint size down again. There you go. Animation, joint size. Right. So we want that hierarchy. So we need to think, where does movement start? Because that is where the topmost joint of the hierarchy is going to be. So when you move your leg, are you moving your foot forward and everything else is following, or are you moving your hip and pushing everything else forward from the hip? Yeah, hip. So we start at the hip. So hip is our absolute top of the leg joint chain. So we'll chuck in, oops, we'll actually use the joint tool. Chuck in a joint at the hip, and one at the knee, and we want it sort of at the front of the knee, because that's where it actually bends. And then one at our ankle, one in the middle of the foot, and one at the end of the foot. So there is our first joint chain. Yes. So you've got a bunch of view options down the side here. You generally use the first three, which is one view, 4 views, or one view and the outliner. And you can press space to toggle between them. 4 views. And it'll just toggle to whichever one your cursor is over. Yeah. So I've placed that, and even if I know it's correct on this axis, if I have a look at the front axis, it's actually right in the middle. So we'll go ahead and fix that. We'll select our topmost joint and just push it over, make sure it's the one in the middle there-ish, make sure the knee's in the right spot, push the ones below it, and put the knee over a bit as well. Yeah. So, I know this is a bit cheap and nasty, which is, cheap and nasty is a horrible situation to be in when you're rigging. Rigging needs to be as clean and as tidy as possible. You want to have no extra stuff going on, no extra history on your objects. Everything needs to be named, everything needs to be frozen, in the sense that, well, not so much joints, but controls, which we'll get to, need to be frozen. All these values need to be 0. And the reason for all this cleanliness, why it's necessary, is because in an industry situation, you'll be passing on your rig to an animator. An animator needs a blank slate. So it's up to you to create a simple blank slate that is idiot-proof. And to do that, things need to be very, very, very clean. So had I the time, I would, from the very next thing I would do is go into my outliner and start naming these joints. I'll do it for the first joint chain and then knock the rest. So this is going to be hips, left, and then down.
Is there a universal syntax that everyone uses an underscore between, or is it kind of?
I've seen a few. It's normally underscore left or underscore L. Or capital L underscore
left,
you tend to have, sometimes you get more things you want to add, like hip, left hip upper, or left hip lower, so the name generally comes first, and then the suffixes go on the end. So this would be knee, left, knee, left. I would design it all that stuff. You'll notice that you get plus motion dice signs say that the motion dice is now have a label. This is our ankle left, and so on and so on. So I've got my joint in there, pretty cool, I like the position. Next thing I want to do is want to do it on the other side. So I'm going to do the right leg. So I could do it again, or could even just duplicate it and move it across, but it's got a bit of a bow to it, so I need to actually mirror it to get that right. And there's a cool little tool in Maya for mirroring joints where I can go skeleton, mirror joints, choose the option box. If you're not familiar with that, Maya has a whole bunch of menus, and then it's got like even more menus. You notice as I change this, the actual menus change. So it's got sets and sets and sets of menus, and within those menus, a whole bunch of options have just normally pressing it and option box. So you can just do it normally, or you can add extra options to it. So it's always going to check the option box to see what it is actually doing. I'll set this to default settings. So it's asking me to mirror these joints. It asks me which direction it wants to mirror it. If you can see this little widget in the corner, it's got X, Y, Z. It's telling me which direction is X, Y, and Z. So when it says mirror across, you can think of it literally, where is it going to put the mirror? So default is X, Y. So have a look at that. X, Y is going X and Y, so the mirror is going to be pretty much across your body. If I change it to Y, Z, look at that, and Y, Z is sort of that way and that way, so the mirror is going to be slicing through the middle of her body up and down, which is actually the one I want, and then XZ is basically, it's going to mirror, the mirror is going to be on the floor. So I want YZ, which is cool, and I can actually do my naming here as well, so I can tell it to search for the word left and replace it with right. Oops. And then mirror away, and we have more joints, and it's either already labeled for me, which is brilliant. So you just replace whatever you want to change. So if you use the L and R the syntax, you replace L with R. All right. So there's legs. Put some in the arms now. Same process. Let's go to the front view. It's generally good for arms. Chuck in a joint, joint. I'm not going to do hands today. It just takes too long. I'll load up the file and show you later what cool things you can do with hands, but it's very, very tedious because you literally put as many joints in the hand as you would in like almost the rest of the body, because you have a separate joint for each knuckle. So it's what 1, 2, 3, 4 times 5. Let's say 20 joints. Was there a question?
Does the size of the joint restrict the amount of movement?
No. The actual size of the joints themselves is entirely arbitrary. It's what you see as a joint is just a physical representation. So I've got something to click and something to see where I put the thing. If no matter what the actual size of the joint controller, let's just consider it a point in space. That's what it's marking. And if you want to do stuff like volumetric deformations, like muscle systems and something, then that's a completely different thing. Which you generally don't need to use, because there's a lot of stuff you can do in skinning, which I'll show at the end of this, which can actually achieve the same effect. Cool. So we've got arm joints. I'll mirror that one as well. Mirror joints, same as before. In we go. Lovely. And I'll do the spine on that. So let's go. So spine is a little bit more different. So generally we go one at the hips, one at the abs, one at the diaphragm area, one at the middle of the chest, one at the back of the chest, one at the base of the neck, one at the top of the neck, one at the top of the head. So I'm trying to get this shape of the spine as natural as possible to what an actual spine would look like. And I may decide to remove some of these joints later if I think they're unnecessary, and so on and so forth. So now I've secondly got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different joint chains, which is not what I want. So I'll look in the outliner and see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm just going to start labeling a couple of these. Like this one here, I'm going to label a root joint, which is going to be the parent of every single other joint, and then generally these would be joints 2, 3, 4, 5. Joint spine 1, spine 2, spine 3. Unless you're so into biomedical science that you can actually name the vertices. What's that?
You're up to the vertebrae.
Yeah. There are some really advanced rigs where they will actually put in literally like bones all the way along the spine and then use another set of bones similar to this one here, where it's more spaced out, to control those other bones. And you can get some really cool effects doing like that, stuff like that, but it's not something I'm going to cover today. So I've got all my different joint chains. I'm going to start parenting them together. So I'm going to take my hips and parent it to the root joint. So P for parent, and you'll see it's added another joint. It's not actually added another joint, so there's no more spheres, but we've got this sort of bone in the middle. And that's an example of how it's just a representation. It's not actually adding anything. It's just representing in 3D space that these joints are part of the same hierarchy. So I'll do the other one. And I'm actually going to add some more joints in here, because there is a bone that sits about here, called, I believe it's called the clavicle, And if you put a joint there in your models as well, you can actually get some good movement along that sort of neck area, as well as a little bit more control over a little more independent control over the shoulders. And shoulders are a massive problem area, so the more controls, the better. So I'm actually going to put this lovely jacket on another layer and hide it for now. Yep.
If I missed the earlier class, were there things on what you did earlier here on the YouTube channel?
They will be when they're processed.
Yeah, everything in these over the entire week will go up, which is a lot to get through, but yes, eventually it will happen. Another good practice is actually take all the mesh as well, and I'm going to put that on another layer, so I can turn it on and off at will. So I'll add another layer with that on it, call it mesh, and yeah, I can just toggle that on and off as I need. But I need it on now, so I'll do that. You can also turn it into a template layer, which makes it a little bit easier to work around. So I'll take the joint tool again. I'm just going to pop one here. And I'll call it clavicle. Left. And make sure it's in the right, roughly the right spot here. Have a look in 3D view as well. Let's see a little bit more. Push it back. There we go. Narrow that. Sweet. And start parenting them together. So child first. Oops. Child, shift, parent, press P. Child, shift, parent, press P. Child, parent, P. Child, parent.
So it's a child and a parent.
Yes. Which is very annoying because we're going to do constraints later. And constraints are parent and child. And I promise you I will get it wrong at least once before the end of this class.
Why don't you say the same?
Yeah, that's something to ask the audience, guys.
Yeah.
Okay, I will.
Yeah. Alright, so now if I have a look at my outliner, we can see all of our joints in one big joint chain, which is very good, much more desirable. So, apart from the hands and the fingers, that's more or less all the joints we need for this model. So we can actually roll to the next thing, which is IKs. IK stands for inverse kinematics. And kinematics mean movement, inverse meaning opposite to forward kinematics. So when it comes to moving joint rig, there's sort of two ways to go about it. You can use forward kinematics, which essentially, if you think of forward kinematics as if you're moving your arm, forward kinematics is you start at the shoulder, and then you move them, and then you move down the chain, and you move the next one, and then you move down the chain, and you move the next one. Whereas inverse kinematics, we start at the other end, and we move that, and it uses math and vectors and stuff to figure out which way the joints in between need to turn. So normally we'll have forward kinematics on most of the joints, but the arms and the legs we generally put inverse kinematics on because it makes it a lot easier to move them around. So I'm going to start adding some kinematics, some IK handles to these arms and legs. So if we go to my skeleton, so I'll put it on first. Go to my skeleton, IK handle tool. I'm just going to make sure that this is set to RP solver. And I'm going to go there to there. So now it turns brown, and I've got this little brown handle here. It's kind of hard to see, but especially with the widgets on it, but trust me, it's there. So now I can use that to manipulate these bones. So for example, the thing with joints is you can move them around manually, but they stretch. See the joint stretching, which is bad. But generally, if you're manipulating a joint, you want to rotate it. So I can rotate the. I'll turn that down a bit. So I can go and then. I should have fixed the joint orientation. They're all going in the wrong direction. I might actually do that now real quick. I don't really have time to explain joint orientation, but basically joints have a direction in which they're facing, which will define which way they rotate. So generally you want them all to line up. and that's better than it was a moment ago. So that'll do. Oopsie daisies. So okay, handle tool, top to bottom. So yeah, as I was showing, we rotate our joints like so, and we can do fun things like that. Or if we've got the IK, we can just pick it up and move it around. And we'll see that the knees like bending semi-naturally as well, which is really cool. So we're going to chuck some more IKs on. One there, to there, and there, to there, and there, to there. So that's pretty much what we want from IKs at the moment. I mean, I'm going to put a fancy one on the spine later, which is a different kind of IK, but it's really good stuff out of it. But yeah, so now we have our joints, we have our IKs, and we would start thinking how we're going to start manipulating this model. Actually, let me check what my work in progress files are, because that'll dictate where we go next. Whether we go straight onto oh no, controls. Alright, so I've already added some controls to this. So this one I prepared earlier actually has an extra bone in the forearm here. That's so I can get some realistic forearm rotation. So if you, what's that?
We've got a message to say that the ocular presentation is best to happen on the main stage.
Okay, cool.
So I'm pretty sure that all these kids are more interested in my stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Alright, so as I was saying, if you look at your arm, when you rotate your wrist, your elbow doesn't really rotate as much as your wrist does. So I've put an extra bone in here, so when it comes to doing some cool stuff, I can actually control that rotation. So the front of my arm is rotating more than the middle of my arm. So I needed an extra bone to facilitate that happening in Maya. So that's what that is. But other than that, it's still got an IK and it's still moving around like the other one was. What's that?
You pull the joints in the head.
Yes. I did that really quickly when the message was coming up. Yeah.
How do you do IR? Like what?
IKs. What's that? IKs.
No, like IR. So like how you make it select multiple joints to make it smooth.
To make it smoother.
Like the movements. You know how like it's brown?
Yes.
Yeah. How do you do that?
Yeah, those are IK handles.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so basically I want to have a joint chain. Just create a quick one. Let's create our second leg. That's some feet. There we go. So I'll generally I'll go from the top of the joint of the IK chain to the bottom. Generally, you don't want more than 2 in a joint chain. Even for this fancy arm thing, I had to do some crazy things to move the handle. You notice that the brown stops after 2 joints. I had to go into the actual depths of the program well, not really the medium depths of the program to move that around to make it work properly. But I go from top to bottom, and then I've literally just got a little handle here which I can use to move it around. And there are also some constraints that you can, I think I've already put some on this work in progress model, that will actually you can control the direction in which those joints bend. So yeah, you basically just select the top joint, then the end joint, and then you're done. Away you go. So I've already shared it. I've started a little bit here, but I'll just ignore that for now. So I've pretty much got all the joints and IKs that I want at this stage. So I need to start adding controllers. And what controllers are, they are. When we animate a rig, we never want to touch a bone. We never want to touch an IK. We want to make other objects that control those. And the reason is I've already got some controls on the foot. So the foot and the leg is being controlled by an IK handle. If I wanted to grab that IK handle, I have to zoom all the way in until I can find that little brown line and press it and then move it around. And it's doing some weird things because it's all logged in. Whereas, as you can see, I've got a sort of foot-shaped circle thing here. I can grab that from my wrist anywhere, and that's doing all the work for me. And it's another layer of abstraction. You see I've already zeroed these out and things are going on. Really, really cool. So we want controls. We want control curves to manipulate our bones for us, so the animator never has to touch a bone. So we create those ourselves manually and then constrain them to the joints using what's called a constraint. So I'll start by doing up the arm here. So I'm going to create, I think I have LC shape. LC shape. Sweet. So this is a plugin for Maya that you can get. It's called LC shape. You can Google it. And basically what it does is it saves me a bunch of time by getting all these extra options for me. So I can create like a NURBS circle and a square, but in terms of curves that have no geometry, that's it. So LC shape has got a whole bunch more that I can do. So I can create a cube, and unlike a polygon cube, it's not made of polygons, it's made up of lines. And we want lines because they don't render. We don't have to worry about them rendering. We can put as many of these lines onto our model as we want and never have to worry about them rendering, which is cool. So I'm going to take my lining cube and I'm going to snap it to our wrist joint because that's where the IK is, so that's where our movement starts. And it's going to shape it a bit more naturally. This is what I want it to encompass the whole wrist, like a big square bracelet. That's cool. Alright, that's where I want it. So I'm going to freeze transformations and we'll have a look at these values. And I can modify, freeze, transformation. I've got a shortcut, so I always forget where it is. So freeze transformations, and they all reset to 0. It hasn't moved, it's just reset basically where the default position is. So now the default position is there. Yeah, absolutely. So now if I move it around and I go, oh crap, I want it back in that position, I can just go 0. And use an actual keyboard and not a Mac. Don't think I'm using a Mac because, oh, Maya's better on a Mac. I'm using a Mac because I have a Mac. Maya's fine on either Mac or PC. Not so great on Linux. No, it's exactly the same. The only issue I ever found was when I first launched it, it looked like this. And without the menu bar, I couldn't move it around or resize or anything. It did just a bit quick. But I think it's just a bug for me. Did a bit of Google searching, found a bit of the script I can use to fix that. It's all good. But yeah. Alright, so that's there, but it's controlling nothing. So basically what we want is when we move the box, we want the IK to move with it. So we got an option that I've already shown is simply to parent it. So I can go child, parent, P. So now basically when I'm selecting the box, it's automatically selecting the IK handle. So now that moves with that. But that's not a very good solution. And the reason for that is it mucks up our outliner. So when I parent something, it'll actually, these are all my IK handles by the way, it'll actually move that IK out of its spot in the outliner and put it in a hierarchy with my cube. And I don't want that because I want to keep that as clean and simple as possible. So I'm going to use constraints. So Maya has a bunch of constraints. Basically what they do is they pass values from one object to another. And by value I mean these values. So translate, position, rotation, preobvious, scale, also preobvious. So we've got a bunch of constraints. I'm not going to explain all of them because you generally only use point, aim, orient, and parent. The rest you don't even, pole vector sometimes. The rest you don't even bother with. So point will pass translation values, position values. Aim is a way of controlling rotation. Orient will literally just pass the rotation value. And parent will do translation and rotation. So for this, IKs, remember, joints, we rotate. IKs, we move. So we want a point constraint. So I'm going to select the parent first this time, and then the child, and choose point constraint. Now if we have a look at the IK, all the translation values have turned blue. Maya has a color coding system. Whenever a value is being affected by something else, it'll change color. So in the case of a constraint, it'll turn blue. In the case of a connection, straight connection, it'll turn yellow. In the case of an expression, it'll turn purple. In the case of the keyframe, it'll turn red. So now I can't actually change these. Well, I can, but they won't stick. Yeah. So I can't actually change the values of this manually, and if I do, the moment I re-establish it, it's just going to snap back. So those are no longer what I have to worry about, but these ones are good. So you notice when I'm moving the controller, the thing moves with it. So that's our first controller. The second one would be I want to move the hand as well. So the hand's moving, but I can't rotate it. So I need another controller for rotation. So I'm going to chuck in, I like to use a circle for this. And it's also a good idea to keep your controllers intuitive. Generally we have arrows or boxes for things that move and circles or curved arrows, like this one, for things that rotate. So I like to use a box and a circle on my arms because it looks cool and it's intuitive. So I'll rotate, get this in the position I want it to be, back around, make it bigger, raise transformations. Alright, so the wrist movement was moving the IK. The wrist rotation will be rotating the joint. So I'm going to select the controller, then the joint, and then do an orient constraint. So if I look at this joint, all the rotation values have turned blue. If I have a play around with the rotation of this sphere, circle, I'm going to be rotating my joint. So the other very important thing with rigging in terms of cleanliness is parenting of your controllers. Your controllers need to be intuitive and move with each other in ways that don't affect them negatively and do affect them positively. So prime example of this is if I want to move my hand to up here and then rotate it, it's not very intuitive to rotate it from here. That's just silly. So the solution to that is I want the wrist rotate controller to move when the wrist move controller moves. So I'll just parent them together so that the rotate controller becomes a parent of the move controller. So selecting a one, you'll notice selects both now, or selecting the child selects itself, selecting the parent selects them both. So now when I move the wrist controller, the wrist rotate controller moves with it, and I can spin that around as well. So once you get controls all over the body, that gets very, very, very complicated and can get very, very messy very quick. So that was the controller there. You'll see I've put some more controllers on the feet here. I've actually done some mediumly advanced stuff here where I've actually added a whole extra joint chain to the feet. The reason we do that is feet are very annoying to rig because you can bend them two ways. You can bend from the ankle up, or you can bend from the toe. So if you're thinking of saying putting out a cigarette, you're rotating from the toe. Or if you're thinking of flicking something up your foot, you're rotating from the ankle. So in our standard rig, the one we made ourselves before, we did have rotation from the ankle. I wonder if I can do it while this is still. So we can rotate from the ankle. It's all locked in. Maybe we can do it from here. No. So yeah, the basic rig, we can rotate from the ankle, but if we start at rotate, hang on, I'll just do another one. Joint tool. Yeah.
Is there shortcuts you can run with this, or is it just
Yeah, G. G will will activate the last tool you used. Oh no, Y, sorry. Y will activate the last tool you used. G will do the last thing you did, such as freeze transformation or point constraint or whatever. So if I had lots of point constraints, I'd line them all up, and I'd say that one, point constraint, and then next one, G, next one, G, next one, G. Okay, so if I think of this as upper leg, middle leg, and then that's my ankle joint there, midfoot, whatever. Comes from here, I can rotate from the ankle, but if I want to rotate from the toe, it does absolutely nothing at all. So, that wasn't even the joint I was trying to select. There we go, nothing at all. So the solution here is to add extra joints going in the other direction. So if I do heel, toe, midfoot, ankle, then I've actually got the the rotation to go this direction as well. And then it's just a matter of setting up a bunch of constraints between that second joint chain and the original joint chain. And once you've got that all set up, you can do some pretty cool stuff. So I've done that there. So now that moves with that. So you see the sort of stretching and joining. That's fine because it's impossible for my leg to move this far anyway. So that's good. But the fact that it's like pointing in the right direction is super cool. So yeah, so they're connected by IK chains and fun things like that. yeah, but now I have the option to bend from to bend from that way, or I can bend straight up. I also had some extra controls here, so I could do some sideways movements and some sort of more cigarette butt sort of stuff. I do some cool things there. So then I'll load up my next file. It's been a while since I looked at it, so we'll see what it actually is. I hope it's just with more controls. Oh, the text is loaded this time. That was nice of it. But okay, so now I have controls everywhere. Foot, legs, whatever. So this is where I would start thinking about the spine, because that's the only thing that doesn't have controls on it yet. So I'm going to use a very, very special kind of IK handle called IK spline. And what that does is it creates a joint chain that actually has a joints off, show joints. Has just a curve on it. This is your average sort of line, and it's made up of a whole bunch of points. Four in this bit. What's that? Oh, that's the marking menu. So if you want to set different components of a thing, you hold down right click and you got an option. I want to select vertices or edges or faces, all sorts of fun things. So yeah, so this is created a curve. And what this curve does is it controls where my bones are. So I can actually manipulate the curve on like a low level, and it'll manipulate the joints to match. Yeah. So I'm going to skip ahead because I've got to finish up soon and I want to get some binding in. But let's see what the next file is. I'm pretty sure the next file has that all rigged up. So I've created some controllers for those joints, and so now I've got some cool things going on. Where I've actually got like infinite control over the spine, and I can do all sorts of fun things. I believe I added some twist controls as well, where causing the body to twist around. And if you notice carefully, you see that it's sort of twisting sort of exponentially less down the spine. So this joint's only twisting a little bit, where the top's twisting a lot. That's sort of just a general function of one of the main IKs. Be really cool. So here's my full rig. I've added some controls for the eyes when I get to those as well. I'm not sure if they're actually live. Oh, yeah. Sweet. So I've got cool things where I can direct where she's looking, or I can direct each eye individually. And you can do cool things here where if I rotate it, she goes all crazy. Yeah, but so yeah, if you want your character to suffer a horrible accident and be scarred for life, then you can do that too. So yeah, some extra controls here for the shoulders, all sorts of fun things. So I'm going to start binding this straight from here. I had a better one. What I haven't done here yet is actually locking some of these controllers. Part of this cleanliness thing again. So for example, this controller here only ever needs to move, it never needs to rotate, it never needs to change size. So rotate, scale, visibility, lock and hide, select. So it's just, now if I try to rotate, I feel like the rotate tool is here grey. Couldn't rotate if I wanted it to. And if I look here, I've only got translate controls here as well. So it's idiot proof. The animator cannot get that wrong. If you want to be absolutely hardcore, you can actually set limitations on how far you can move it in any one direction. But yeah, but you have to give them a little bit of credit, so there's nothing, I wouldn't go as far as to actually locking that off. Yeah, so, but yeah, I would do that for all sorts of things. Like the wrist controllers only ever need to rotate, they don't ever need to move or anything, so I would lock everything but rotate. So, binding. I'm going to show you a cool thing I found, which came up in May of 2012. So, an extra option came up. There used to just be smooth bind and rigid bind. The difference being is each vertex in a rigid bind can only ever be controlled by one joint, and entirely by one joint. So when I say vertices, I mean all the different points so all the purple dots basically are vertices. So if you think, if I only had it controlled to one, then like if you think about the shoulder, there'd be like a solid line, whereas where it bends, where I sort of actually want it to be like smooth. So a smooth bind will have your vertices are influenced by a number of joints, and not a complete influence. It might only be like 30% influenced by one, 30% influenced by another, and 40% influenced by a third joint. So you can actually get a sort of smooth gradient over your joints. Interactive skin bind is rigid bind, but it's got some more tools and how you go about it. So I select the, again I may get the order wrong, let's find out. The mesh, then the skin, bind skin, interactive skin bind. There we go. Alright, so interactive skin bind has these cool little widgets which show me how much influence each bone is having over each part of the body, and I can manipulate them. So for example, red is obviously very much influenced by the bone I've selected, and green and blue not so much. So I can see that my upper arm bone is influencing way too much of the lower part of the arm, so I'm just going to move that in a bit. I can even stretch it out and make the sort of the grey area a bit more, a bit wider. And then I do want to be obviously some of the shoulder, but nowhere near that much, so I'll move that in and maybe shrink that down a bit so it's not influencing so much around here. Shrink it down and grab it back that big plate there. And do that, which would be cool. Looking not bad, so let's have a look at that. Wow, there's a lot of horrible influences going on here, so let's have a look and see what other bones are going on. Yeah, so that has almost no influence on anything, so that makes me up. Let's go up.
You just select a bone and it just came up with that?
Yeah, I selected the tool. There's also under here, under skin, edit smooth skin, interactive bind skin tool, which was selected. The thing I said about Y, your last tool will come with Y, it'll also come up in this little icon here. So for example, I change to the joint tool, I'll change to the joint tool. So I change to my interactive skin bind tool.
I see it's also being mirrored on the other side as well.
Yes, yes. So yeah, when I select a joint, it'll also, oh, I didn't, that's weird. Okay, it'll also do the other side as well. Let's move that down a bit, and actually I'm going to stretch that out a bit. Yeah, that's far too small. A bit bigger. Want to widen a bit of stretch. Alright, let's see if that's any better than it was before. It may not necessarily be, because binding can be an absolute pain. It takes a while to get it all to behave properly. That has far too much influence. So I'll push it down, smaller. So basically it's the clavicle side. I did that a bit too much. Yeah, and this is a lot simpler than some of the other ways, but of doing it. But again, it's a lot more sledgehammer. I would still have to go in and paint some weights manually, which I may show very briefly. So that's already looking a lot better than it was. And it's been annoying me for ages, but yeah. So that's how I start moving it around, and then you'll see the head's a good example, because generally you want the head to always be 100% constrained to that joint there. Yet sometimes it'll put some on that joint. So let's see if it did that or not. Yeah. And those eyes and mouth should be parented to that joint as well to stop that from happening. So let's have a look at this interactive skin joint tool. The other one that I mentioned was the paint weights tool. If I go, there we go. Paint skin weights tool. I get a list of all the joints, and I can select that. So I actually named these ones, which is good. Should be right at the end. So neck, head base. So it's actually showing me the influence that each joint has, and I can paint the areas. So I have to turn off the hair for now. Goodbye hair. You can tell it's good texture though, because there's still like stuff under there. So I want this joint at the top to have no whatsoever anywhere. So I can just start painting replace, value, 0. No, thank you. I can actually do flood, which just puts that value everywhere, which is good. Neck base, and neck base is pretty much the head bone. So it shouldn't be there at all, so I'll get rid of that. Get rid of that. Oh, this is supposed to be the neck bone. And I'll turn the value back up to 1. Let's have a look now, see if it's a little bit better, but it's still a bit funky. So I'm going to go back to the other tool. Because Maya has this issue with normalization, which it changed how it did it a couple of versions ago, where the amount of implements a bone will have will like change. So if you're working in the wrong direction up the chain, it can get a bit funky and it get a bit weird. So that's why the interactive bind tool I was using before and we'll start using it again in a moment is super useful because you can get a lot of that annoying stuff out of the way before you even start. Start doing these refinements. So yeah, there's something else implemented in there, and I'm not sure what it is. So
sorry, if it's a hospital game or something.
yeah. Where's the thing gone? Edit smooth skin, interactive skin bind tool, this bone. Yeah, so that's not supposed to be doing that. There's nowhere near supposed to be going even near that far down the neck. There, and bigger right here. Definitely a lot bigger around there. So that's more kind of what I want. What's that joint doing? Yes, that's far too much. Take it down there. Put it down a bit.
So the tool in 2014
will be this one. Yeah. Yeah. 2012 they introduced this tool.
So is this still good?
Yes, this is still good. I think they even have some more tools, which may make it even easier, but I haven't had a chance to play around with them yet. Let's have a look, see if that's fixed it up at all. There's still something influencing it, and I'll find it. I swear I will. But yeah, this is why binding can take some time.
The more time you actually spend in binding to get the model looking right, it's very satisfying once you get everything nailed down and you just twist the head or something. It's like, oh, that neck just beautifully or something like that. And it's very satisfying. And then you can go and get your character dancing in some strange alien dance.
Yeah, I still love the hips. So the hips are always the most fun. There's still a bit of funkiness going on here, but
especially when you get like one of my characters was an old man, and you always test your rigs out by doing those sorts of little dance moves. And you got this old guy with this walking cane just bending his hips like that and boogieing down. It's always hilarious.
so yeah, I could spend another hour and a half on getting rid of all these kinks and making it move properly. But yeah. When I was first doing this, I was just trying it with the paint weights, and it just kept undoing the stuff that I was doing. And I found this interactive tool, and it made everything work so beautifully. So yeah, I'll load up the final rigged model. Should be rigged 5 with any luck. I'll turn off the joints, don't need to see those. And I've color coded my controllers for.
So using that interactive binding tool and bound the mesh to the joints automatically?
When you bind, no matter how you bind, it'll do its best guess. And then it's just up to you to tidy it up and make sure, say, no, that's completely wrong, please do it this way. Which happens quite a lot. And there's options in the binding to say, how it calculates its best guess. So this is the final ring. Except for that bug I forgot to fix, and it fixed about 3 times, kept getting to save it. But
And in the end, he sent over the file to me, and I'm like, I need to fix that. He goes, oh, I thought I fixed that.
yeah,
David, what did you do to her?
I fixed it several times, but then each time I say,
it's just a little parenting issue where instead of parenting it to the bone, he parented the geometry to the controller. So it didn't quite follow.
yeah. So
it's a simple mistake.
you'll notice that the mouth and stuff and hair is following the controller exactly, whereas it should be following the bone. But yeah, it was an easy fix. You just need to move the constraint around. But yeah, we got all sorts of fun stuff going on. Yeah, I'm just going to open up for questions now. Are there any questions? Because it was a whirlwind tour of the entire process. Yeah.
Funny question. I missed all the other sessions.
Yep. To build the mesh? Yes, you can do it in Maya. A lot of people do it in Maya. The way that was taught before was using ZBrush quite a bit. to refine and build in details and mesh as well. One of the popular pipelines you see is they build a base mesh in Maya, which is very, very simple, very, very low poly, and take it into ZBrush, and then subdivide it, and then create a bunch of details and export those as a texture map or a bump map. And then apply that texture map to the low poly thing back in Maya, because Maya cannot handle that amount of polygons that ZBrush can.
Yeah, normally it crashes if you try and put anything over 500,000, depending on how much memory your computer has.
Yeah, I think this standard model, especially on the laptop, is especially with anywhere from 4 to 8 gig of RAM, you're looking at 20,000.
Yeah.
A little over that.
And if you're going to export to a game engine, even less.
10,000 right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, no problem.
Continue tomorrow.
Any last questions while I'm packing up? No? Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, have a crack.
So guys, I'll just let you know what's going on at the moment. We have a comics panel in here, happening straight after this. In R3 next door, we have an advanced C++ programming presentation.
That's where I brought the bag.
In R4, we have the game option is just about ending now. I think they have about 3 more things to sell there. We have a Unity game development presentation over in R6. Happening at the main stage at the moment is an Oculus Rift virtual reality presentation. Those will be virtual reality goggles. And I'm not sure if it's still happening now, but it should still be running now. The AR drones are being played with on the hall next to the main hall. At 5 o'clock in the Rotunda, we have some game tournaments. Come to me if you want to know what those game tournaments are. Okay, thank you.
What about the table?
Okay, so
Yep.
Good at drawing to create meshes, or is it just...
we have
Yes and no. To create your own meshes, yes. Coming up with a good concept is key. It really is. Maya is a very good doing tool. It's not a very good trying and experimenting tool. It's very hard to come up with designs in 3D.
And I saw that you're using a tablet.
Yes.
What tablet have you
I like the Wacom Intuos brand. I've found sometimes it was a bit of a splurge buy. If you're going to use something like ZBrush or sketching in Photoshop, then it's a necessity. But I just
You don't need something fancy like an Intuos 5, which David used here. I personally, I just use a normal Bamboo One tablet, Bamboo Fun tablet. Those things will do just fine. The thing that you're looking for is the sensitivity within the tablet. That's what gives you the stroke detail.
Yeah, Wacom is the best you can get as far as sensitivity and detail is concerned.
Yeah. Well, Wacom's like the brand, and then like Intuos, Graphite, and Bamboo are like the models.
Sadly, I don't have time to use it because there are about 50 of us. Use one tablet.
Sweet, thanks. Thank
No
you very
problem.
much.
Oh, thanks for good
Come
questions.
tomorrow
Cheers.
for your,
Thank you.
the final Maya with animation.
Alright, thanks. Yeah.
See ya.
See ya.
Come on, guys. Sorry, let's see the virtual reality.
All right. Come on.
Okay.
puts away like an automatic extra 20 every week in her super or whatever.
Right.
So in her tax.
Yeah.
So 20 a week, 52 weeks, $1,000. So that plus I did some homework for her company during the year. Paid like 700 tax. I got every cent back because I didn't make it over 20 grand.
Yep.
I declared all my art money, said you scored at the hobby level, so you don't have to worry about that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And
Oh, so you do go to an accountant?
oh yeah, no, we've been going in for like 10 years.
Yeah, cool.
So, yeah, no, it's proper. It's a proper.
I was curious about that.
No, we book in very like.
Yeah, early days.
Nice. Titties. Porn on the big screen. Now you can play my game. No, I quickly grabbed a chuck of a flash drive, but most of the characters aren't actually in the
Oh.
DYRN.
But did I spell it right or spell it wrong? Oh, fuck. Dark Matter. You know. Yeah, I don't want to give her that. I don't want to give her a review.
Hey, I just saw Alicia J.
Yeah. It's remember